Crafting and Crime Daily, the show where I, your host, Rebecca, aka Craft and Journey, recap live trials for you. We're currently covering the trial of Michael Keatley, the ice cream man for South Hillsborough County for many years in Florida. Don't you just love Florida? But first, how was your weekend? I had a really good one, except this time change is kicking my ass. I hate it. Oh my God. I hate it. It was so late when I got to bed last night. Really, really late. 3:30, 4 in the morning. Wasn't tired. So I'm going to need a nap today. Seriously. And now that I'm recording this, it's probably almost lunchtime, because I'll get adjusted, but right now I'm not. So I had a great live yesterday. Lots of people showed up. I thought nobody was going to show up because of the time change, and everybody was there going, oh, we're tired. Yeah, me too. So I finished the square for March. So let me show you again. This is the January. So I'm making a gnome blanket. So a different gnome each month. This is January's gnome. And they're large because it's going to be a large blanket. Yes, this is February. She's so pretty. I'm going to do a female one for April. So male January, female February. March, we're going to say March is non-binary. How about that? That way, I'm in with the crowd. There you go. There's March. It's all done. Isn't it adorable? Look at his orange beard. And yeah, it went so much more smoothly this month because I'm getting the hang of it. I'm using smaller bobbins, and it's going much quicker. Yeah, 2 days and I was done with it. So. And the black, I didn't have black yarn. Well, I had some black yarn, but it was like a 3-weight, so I just used 2 strands instead of 1. Turned out fantastic. Worked just fine, because I'm trying to use the yarn in my stash. I don't want to go out and buy yarn. Although last month I did have to buy the dark green and the light green yarn, because I don't usually buy green yarn. I love pinks and stuff, so I don't know what April's going to look like, but it's going to be, I can't wait. This weekend, I'll be cross-stitching. I'm going to be working on the White Santa, which is a Lucas S pattern. And it's one of those patterns that comes in a kit. And it's the most beautiful put-together kit that I've ever done for cross-stitch. You get all the thread, you get the fabric, a 16-count Aida fabric, which is perfect for me, for my eyesight. And the thread is good. It's anchor thread, and it's just a really, and a big chart. I love big charts because I can see them. So today I'm back working on the diamond painting. So I finished one side of it. So I asked my partner, where should I go next? And they're like, do the other side. She doesn't want me to see the middle of this thing. So I'm on the other side now. This is what I've done so far. I started last night, and I'm just filling in some holes this morning. So, and then we'll just do this side here. No more blanket until next month. So let me talk to you about what happened in the Keatley case on Friday. So Friday there was a continuation of the cross-examination of this guy that used to be the partner of Michael Keatley. He drove the ice cream truck. Well, Michael Keatley drove the ice cream truck, and this guy went along with him, and he did all the sales of the ice cream. I'm trying to look for his name. What was his name? Oh, David Beckwith. Squirrely guy. And on cross, man, he was going toe to toe with this lawyer. Like, he was not having any BS, you know. The lawyer was just kind of nudging him. You could tell he was just kind of pushing him to see how far he could push this guy, to the point where the guy finally called him. He's, listen, if you want to be an asshole, I'll be an asshole right back at you. And I'm thinking, ooh, okay, go get him. um, just trying to box him into certain testimony that he had given before. And he'd go, okay. He says, listen, this is what I'm telling you, what the way it was. He could shoot a gun. Well, wasn't he disabled? Didn't he have limited? He goes, I'm not a doctor. I just know what I saw. He could shoot a gun. Okay. He did finally admit that, he does walk with a limp, and he has limited use of his arm. But I think it's just because he was getting irritated, and he's like, yeah, okay, whatever, okay. But he could shoot a gun. No love lost between him and the defendant. He kept looking over at the defendant. He'd give an answer, then he'd look over at him. He'd give an answer, he'd look over at him. And he doesn't think much of the defendant. Not much at all. No, doesn't have any good opinions about the defendant. But this guy, he held a gun to the defendant's head. Like, who does that? If you don't like something I say, just walk away. I mean, he told Michael to stop the truck. And Michael didn't stop the truck, but the guy had already said, hey, we're in a bad neighborhood. I don't want to be here. Michael didn't, was taking it very lightly. And then they got into an argument. And then this guy said, let me out of the truck. And Michael didn't stop the truck. And the guy says, okay. And he takes the gun and puts it in his head. Now, this is a 3-time felon. He's not supposed to be in possession of a weapon. But there he goes, putting a gun to somebody's head. So do I believe that they left on bad terms? Yeah. Do I believe this guy would probably do anything to get him in trouble? Probably. Yeah. Oh, sure, he can shoot a gun. Yeah. So, and the defense tried to insinuate that it was this guy that came up with this plan to dress up as a cop and go after these people, go after people that he thought was involved in his robbery. And he's like, no, it was the defendant's idea. It wasn't my idea, but I said I'd do it with him, Okay. So then the next person on the stand was retired. No, first they showed a video. They showed a video of this guy, Trent Clark, Deputy Trent Clark. Now, I don't know why they showed the video. They usually show a video of prior testimony when the person's not available. So I don't know if this guy doesn't work at the police department anymore and doesn't live in the area. Maybe he moved away from the area. If you live more than 100 miles away, they can do your testimony by Zoom or so. I don't know if he passed away. I don't know. Anyway, so irregardless, it probably doesn't really matter. So they used his testimony from the prior trial, and they said he was part of the squad called the Target Area Response Team, the Sheriff's Target Area Response Team. So they called it START, START, Sheriff Target Area Response Team. So that night they were tasked with going out and surveilling Michael Keatley. This was within a week or so. It was still in November. So within a week of the robbery, or the murders that happened Thanksgiving morning. And they had heard around, the word on the street was Michael Keatley was involved, and the detectives had already been to the hospital to talk to Michael's ex-girlfriend, and she told them that, yes, Michael had been looking for this guy named Creeper and had told her that if she ever ran across him or saw this guy with a tattoo of Creeper on her arm, to let him know because he was going to go after them. Now, she was in the hospital for something totally unrelated, but, and a different officer tried to say why she was in the hospital, and then it just didn't come into the testimony. The judge wouldn't allow it because it's not relevant. It really isn't. But so they interviewed her at the hospital. They had this information. So now they're surveilling his house. And this guy's like parked across the street from the property because it's a large piece of, it's a huge farm that his parents own, and he has a home at the farm. So they wait for him, and he finally comes out. He leaves the property. It's about 10 o'clock at night. He leaves the property in a dark blue two-toned van. And he starts heading down this road, and he exceeded the speed limit. So once he exceeded the speed limit, this guy in his Mustang, which is a plainclothes car, puts the blue lights on top and pulls him over and says, "You've exceeded the speed limit. But again, to give you a warning this time, but we're not, but I need you to, would you be willing to come down to the precinct and talk to us about these murders that just occurred? Remember those murders over in Ruskin? Did you hear about that?" "Oh yeah, I heard about that." "Yeah, we'd like to talk to you about that. Do you want to come down?" So the lead detective that's working on this case, and the assistant lead, both the two lead detectives, they're there. They respond to the scene, and they talk to Michael for a little while, and he agrees. Yeah. They said, "You're not under arrest. We just want to talk to you." Meanwhile, they leave the van there. They leave an officer to guard the van while they go get a search warrant to search the van. They take the officer that pulled Michael over, the start officer, drives him down to the precinct, and that ends his involvement. So that's the whole video. Now we're back live in the courtroom. They bring in the assistant lead detective, not the lead detective. Now, I don't know why they're not bringing the lead detective in. Apparently, he must not be available either, because this is the retired assistant lead detective who he said he retired about a year ago after 25 years on the force, Hillsborough County Sheriff Department. So now he's describing what occurred during the interview. They get, the officer drives him down to the precinct. He comes into the room with this retired officer and he wasn't retired at the time, with the two lead detectives. They read him his Miranda warnings, and then we get to hear tape of the interview. And frankly, Michael Keatley's attitude is just so bizarre, just like flippant, just like these guys are his buddies, and the guy says, "I don't know who was investigating your robbery before, but we're taking over the case and we're going to start over, and tell us about what happened during the robbery." So he describes what happened to him during the robbery. He said there was a vehicle behind him. This is the first time I've heard this version of the story, but he said there was a vehicle behind him that was flashing their lights for him to pull over, so he pulled over. Now, I had heard that someone flagged him down, but I guess that's not true. I don't know. I don't know if the story changed, or I don't know. So he says they flagged him down, and this woman, she looked like she was like 18, 19 years old. He said she was very light-skinned. He thought, based on the texture of her hair, that she was a black woman. But he says, now looking back, I think she could have been Hispanic. I don't know. He says, and because I thought she was black, I assumed these two guys that got onto the truck. She was distracting him at the ice cream window. Meanwhile, these two men get on the truck, and they say, "Give me all your money." And so he takes $12 out of his pocket and gives it to them. They didn't even get the cash that was in his cash box. And then they shoot him 5 times. So he said, I said that they were black because I thought she was black. I was basing that on what I thought she was. And so, that's why I said they were black. And so this is what he's telling these officers during this interview. So, and the guy says, well, you know about those murders over in Ruskin? He goes, yeah, I heard about that. And, and he goes, a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, did you hear about those murders? And, he says, I actually said to my friend, I wouldn't be surprised if they come after me, because the description of that guy sounds a lot like me, and I got robbed and they might think it's me. And he goes, well, why would you think it would be you? And he goes, because that description sounds just like me. But he's laughing. He's like, and he goes, well, wouldn't you? He says, listen, there's no question that I would. How did he put it? Oh, there's no question that I would wish that the men that robbed me would die of a horrible death. But I wouldn't go after a half a dozen people that aren't even related to, I wouldn't do that. And so I need to back up here for going back to the officer that pulled him over. He described that Michael Keatley had a very awkward gait. And gait, I mean, the way he walked was kind of weird. And that he was clearly, visibly, had limited mobility of one of his arms. Which, and if that's true, none of the witnesses at the murder scene describe the guy walking awkwardly or walking with a limp, or, in fact, they say he just was walking normally, past the vehicle and headed towards him. So I thought that was pretty important. And then in the first interview, they went over the attack on the robbery. He denied he says, I didn't have anything to do with those murders. He also said he didn't know anybody by the name of Creeper. He'd never heard of that name before. Never heard of that name. And then after he's talking about the robbery, and he said what he said about, them dying a horrible death, he says, but I don't hold any grudges. He says, you can't live like that. You can't go through your life always holding a grudge. He goes, I realized months ago nothing was going to come of the investigation, and nobody would answer any of my questions. He says, nobody wanted to talk. He said they would talk to me, and then I'd call the detective to come down, and then they wouldn't talk. And he says, so I just gave up. He says, I just gave up. And then they tried to press him. Well, we have witnesses that say that you didn't give up and that you were still asking questions. Now, keep in mind that police officers are allowed to lie during these interviews. They could say whatever. They probably didn't have any witnesses. So at that point, he said, I'm tired. I want to go home. So they're like, oh, okay, So they drove him home. But then when they get to his house, there's all kinds of police officers there, and they're waiting for a search warrant to search the house. And they tell him, you're not under arrest. You're free to go. You can do anything you want. And he goes, well, but you can't go in the house because we're getting a search warrant. We actually have to drive to the judge's house to get the search warrant. Sorry about the clock. It always rings at like 45 minutes after the hour. 40 minutes after the hour. Crazy. So I can't get it to, whatever. So, so they tell him, he's like, well, I really need my medicine. And they're like, well, what medicine do you need? You can't go in there. He said, well, I take Neurontin, and I take pain pills, and I take this, and he goes through this whole laundry list of pills that he takes. Not that they asked, but and then later on one of the attorneys does ask him, why didn't you go get his medication? And he said, no, that's too much of a liability. You know, I don't know if it's properly identified in the containers that was in, because he said it was right on the table. It's right there. Can you go get it? And they wouldn't go get it. He said, but if he had been in any kind of medical distress, I would have called EMS. He seemed fine, and he really did during that interview. He seemed fine. Well, the first interview had ended, so what happens on the second interview is that after they get to the house, and Michael Keatley finds out that he can't go in his house, he says, you know, well, I'll talk to you some more if you want. You know, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Can we go sit in your car? So they go sit in his car, and he turns the recorder on and he starts interviewing him. Now, this is the assistant, not the lead detective, who is Hispanic. And so he starts out by saying to the assistant detective, he's like, I didn't like that other guy. You know, I didn't like the way he was asking the questions, and I feel more comfortable talking to you. So the guy's like, oh, okay, you know. And the guy's like, well, would it surprise you to know that we have a witness that identified you to a T and identified the vehicle you drove tonight to a T? And he goes, well, that's my parents' vehicle. But no, it wouldn't. He says, it doesn't surprise me, but he says, I wasn't there. It wasn't me. So it wasn't me. It wasn't my van. It wasn't my parents' van. I know it wasn't, because I know I wasn't there. He said he was at a party in some other area of Tampa, and he got home about 12:30, and he went to bed. He said, my phone was with me the whole time. The whole time. Do you have my phone records? Do you want to check my phone? And they're like, yeah. And he goes, well, I don't have it. But he had left the phone in his van, so they got the phone another way. But here's why he's so confident about saying that he wasn't at the crime scene and that he was in bed and that his phone was with him, is because the state attorney and the police's theory of the case is that he took that phone and he took the computer with him, and he used a hotspot. He left the phone at home. Yeah, he left the phone at home, but he took a computer with him, and he used a hotspot. Back in 2010, I don't even remember all this, to be honest with you, but apparently back in 2010, you could, you had a mobile hotspot that you could plug into your computer, like a mobile Wi-Fi. I don't remember. Why don't I remember those things? My sister would remember. She's like an elephant. She doesn't forget anything. But I don't remember those things. But apparently I don't remember those things. Isn't that terrible? Anyway, yeah. So, I mean, now everybody's got Wi-Fi. Mobile Wi-Fi is everywhere, right? Well, that's how they were able to place him at the scene of the murder, allegedly. And there's, you know, the defense attorneys are going to argue that it just didn't happen that way. He was at home using his computer. He was not at the scene of the murders using a computer with a hotspot. Anyway, so he continues denying this murder, and the detective keeps throwing in, you know, that he's talked to this person and that person. Like, remember, they're allowed to lie. And he's like, well, it wasn't me. And he kept saying, listen, we can put you there. And he goes, no, you can't. It wasn't me. He says, look at my phone records. I wasn't there. No, I wasn't there. And then at one point he starts yawning, and he's like, man, I need a nap. So they end the interview. So now I am tired. I can't even talk about yawning without yawning. So, before they end the interview, and he's like, listen, I know you're bullshitting me. I know you're full of shit. I know that what you're saying is not true. You can't put me there because I wasn't there. So, you know, you just can't. But then he says, listen, I'm not going to go to prison over, and I'm trying to I'm quoting him, I'm not going to go to prison over a bunch of piece of shits. He goes, these guys are, they're all a bunch of fucking gangbangers, and you need to just ship them back to where they came from. And then he starts talking about how the courts give leniency to these people, and it's the rich, it's the people with money that have to go to jail and prison, but the people that, that are here illegally, they just get slapped on the wrists, and you take their plates from them, and you just send them on their way. Anyway, he ends the interview. I'm not under arrest. You mean I can go? And he's like, yeah, you can go. And he goes, well, can I go in my house? No, you can't go in your house. And now it's like the middle of the night. It's well after midnight. Where is he going to go? So he does say, can you just grab me the wireless phone that's in the house, and I'll call my father. So I think the detective let him use his phone. So he uses his phone, and he calls his dad, and he says, yeah, Dad, I'm home, but they're getting a search warrant. The police are here, and they're getting a search warrant, and I'll update you in the morning. So the officer says, you didn't sound your dad didn't seem too concerned about that. And he goes, he was half asleep. He says, I'm going to have to explain the whole thing in the morning. He was half asleep. Because I thought, that's a strange conversation. If one of my kids called me and said, the cops were getting a search warrant to search their house, I'd be wide freaking awake. What? What? Say that again? Nope. Just hang up. Yep. At one point, he does admit that, because they talk about what guns do you own, and he talks about his guns. And they said, didn't you just recently buy a 22? And he goes, yeah, from a guy I went to high school with and couldn't remember his name. It'll come to me. It'll come to me. Just, we'll move on, but it'll come to me. I don't remember his name, but yeah, I bought it, and it was one of those pump action rifles with a short barrel, which is exactly what the witnesses described the murderer was carrying. And the guy says, well, could you shoot that? And he goes, nah. He goes, well, then why did you buy it? He goes, because I thought I could shoot it. And then after I bought it, I found out I couldn't shoot it. Well, who's been using it? Well, has anybody been using it? He goes, oh, yeah, some friends come over and they use it. And he goes, well, has anybody used it in the last couple of weeks? He goes, and he's thinking about it. He goes, let me think. Oh, yeah, there was a calf that got sick, and we had to put it down. And then he starts talking about this illness that went around the farm, and it came through a goat, and the goat got sick, and I don't know, just farm stuff. So anyway, that's where the cross-examination ensued, and the attorney on cross-examination, it got pretty heated between the detective and this guy, mostly having to do with the fact that a lot of what he was saying to the defendant was lies. He was making all that up. He didn't have any witnesses, that described him to a T, described his van to a T, so it got pretty heated. But, the detective sticks to his guns, he doesn't have a dog in the fight. So the other interesting thing about this trial is that, this is the second time this case has been tried. The first time it was tried back in 2020 for a 2010 case. The attorney that was different, that was representing the defendant. So she happened to be in the courtroom on Friday, and she was sitting in the back of the room. Apparently she stepped down from being his attorney when she decided to run for a position as a circuit court judge. So I believe she's now a judge, but maybe it was her lunchtime or something, and she was sitting in the back of the courtroom. And she always looked like she was taking a nap, but she was listening to the recording. Yeah, interesting. I just thought that was interesting. I feel bad for the parents of these two brothers that were deceased having to listen to the way that this guy talked about Hispanic people. I mean, just assuming they're all Mexican and they all need to be sent back. I mean, it's disgusting. It's just, and the person that I was hearing talk that way on these interviews does not fit the image of the person sitting there as the defendant with his Mr. Rogers sweater on, and yeah, and he looks so bored with the proceedings. He's always like, oh my God, I have never seen a defendant look as bored as this guy looks about this trial. So I think it was very important that the jury did hear what his demeanor was like and how prejudiced he is. I mean, I still need to hear the rest of the evidence before I make up my mind, but, you know, I want to hear that what the ballistics showed and all that kinds of stuff. This trial is going much slower, I think, than they anticipated. I believe that they think the prosecution will wrap up their case by Friday, and the defense wants to put their orthopedic witness on Friday to talk about this guy's injuries and his current function. So let me get the crime calendar out for the week. Today is Monday, March 13th. Yay, we're going to talk about the jewel heist of the century. This will be part 1. The window of opportunity. In 1963, a jewel heist occurred every 32 seconds, with thieves racking up a whopping 41 million in gems by the year's end. Every 32 seconds, what? The golden age of jewel heists would continue through the mid-1960s, with the most notorious occurring on October 29th, 1964, when thieves broke into the American Museum of Natural History in New York City and made off with the jewels valued at $410,000, equivalent to $3 million today. Among the gems were the Star of India, the DeLong Star Ruby, and the Eagle Diamond. None of the 24 gems stolen were insured. Why not? Okay. At the time, the museum's burglar alarm was inactive, and all the windows in the J.P. Morgan Hall of Gems and Minerals were left open 2 inches for ventilation. This sounds like an inside job, doesn't it? Yeah. There was no overnight security guard, and as the thieves discovered when they reached the display cases, there was no active alarms on them. Come and get them! Come and get them! The windows are open. No guards. Come on! Yeah, they were asking for trouble, weren't they? Museum officials later reported that the alarm batteries had been dead for months. The thieves made off into the night, seemingly executing the perfect and perhaps easiest jewel heist ever. Yeah. Holy moly. It does sound like an inside job. Yeah. So, part 2 tomorrow. How many parts is this? Yep, tomorrow is part 2. Just 2 parts. Okay. All right, guys, that's the show for today. If you enjoyed the content, please don't forget to hit the like button on your way out. It helps YouTube know that I exist, and then they show my video to other people. What a concept. Yes. Please consider subscribing. If you're already subscribed, consider becoming a member or a Patreon. Your donations go to help support the content of the channel. And I will see you tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Get some rest. Enjoy the time change. Bye.